to this special episode of Teachers Today. I'm your host, Maria Estevez. Tonight we are accompanied with special guest James Martin, who will be speaking about his plan to implement new techniques to reflective practices.
Thank you, Maria. It's good to be here this evening.
So tell us, James, briefly, what is reflective practice and why is it important in today's schools?
Very simply, reflective teaching practices are the techniques used by teacher practitioners for inquiry, critical analysis, and suggesting improvements to enhance student learning. There is no one universal definition of reflective practice, but the Educational Society acknowledges there is positive connection between student learning and teacher professional development.
Fascinating. So what are some of the techniques that are used by educators to engage in reflective practice?
Some of the commonly seen techniques educators use to reflect include journaling, self-observations, mapping, and portfolios. However, educators may choose to engage in reflection via reading literature, conducting a case study analysis, or using personal inventories. I personally use a 4-step process to reflect on situations and practices. This process begins with the describing of a situation to answer the question, what happened? After describing the reflective topic, an analysis or interpretation is used to determine why the event occurred, and then the analysis leads to an overall meaning or application, which is then used to determine what will happen next.
Again, it sounds like you put a lot of thought into your reflective practices. Do you utilize just one practice, or do you plan to implement new techniques?
Reflective practice is cyclic, and it is always important for teachers to implement new techniques in order to grow professionally. In addition to the 4-step process I currently utilize, I plan to strengthen my reflective practice by implementing mapping to help me visualize events, processes, and potential outcomes. Over the next year, I plan to also implement the 5 states of mind and personal inventory strategies to better understand my behaviors and actions which directly impact student learning. I will begin by taking a personal inventories assessment to determine my current views and behaviors. Afterwards, I will begin anecdotal notes to determine my state of mind during and after situations to understand my current actions and behaviors in those situations. After my initial analysis, I plan to make necessary changes to my behaviors and actions by establishing achievable goals. The big picture goal is to improve the potential outcomes of situations to positively impact student learning. At the end of the year, I will reassess using the personal inventories assessment to determine if any noticeable changes occurred. In addition to the assessment, I will utilize my anecdotal notes to determine if any changes were successful.
It sounds like you have put a lot of thought into this plan to implement new techniques. Do you have an extended plan for year 2 of your implementation?
Well, after the first year, I will need to reevaluate my professional needs. There will undoubtedly be a few changes that I will want to make to my reflective techniques to improve my practice. Again, the process of reflection is cyclic and unique. Each educator will need to identify their professional needs and determine what strategies they believe will benefit their practice. After these practices are defined and implemented, they will need to collect relevant data to determine if the changes were successful. The process then begins again to determine what new changes or techniques are needed.
Around and around it goes. Well, thank you, James, for speaking with us today about reflective teaching practices.
Thank you, Maria. It was a pleasure to be here.
That is all we have on this episode of Teachers Today. Join us next time to learn more about effective teaching strategies.